just will start off on copyright. Alison said when she did a panel in America quite recently, she mentioned the word copyright and people looked on in horror. But it's important to know what it is. So let me just give you a starter for 10 here, John. So when you write a song, you create a copyright, and when you record that song, you create another copyright.
That's true. I think we have to go back a little bit first.
Please, John, please.
If you think back to when the printing press was invented, that invention was a bit like, had the same cataclysmic effect on the world that the digitisation of the internet has had in the past 20 years. Because before that, if you wanted to copy a book, you had to sit down and write it out, word by word. And so when you could actually print it, that produced mass copies immediately. Well, fairly quickly, a lot faster. That was all right for a while, and then I think what happened is that it got to the point where someone would write a book and they'd have it printed, and then someone else would sort of nick it and copy it and do their own copies of it. And at that point, which coincidentally I think was 300 years ago this year, wasn't it? What was called the Statute of Anne was introduced, which said that anyone who created something like a book could have the copyright in that for 21 years, i.e. no one could copy it without getting permission from them and paying them a fee for that. So that's when copyright started. It was literally the right to copy something, and the creator was rewarded. That carried on fine for an awful, I think quite a long time really, and then it got into, we're talking about what we're talking about today. People wrote a song and they wrote it down as sheet music, and they copied the sheet music and they sold copies to people. So that was fine. That's how music publishing started, because they published pieces of sheet music. The revolution that occurred in their world, of course, was when I think first piano rolls and things like that came in, and then eventually records, when sheet music suddenly became almost irrelevant. Not completely irrelevant, but because before that people performed it, but there was no way of copying it. You just went to a live performance and that was it. So you had the song that was copyrighted, but anyone could perform it. They would buy the sheet music and perform it. What changed, of course, when records came about is suddenly you could copy the performance as well. So in a record, there are two copyrights. There is the copyright of the person who wrote the song, and the example I always like to use is Lady Madonna by the Beatles. Lennon and McCartney wrote that song. They own the copyright in that song. Anyone else who performs it or records it, they own the copyright in that song. And that copyright these days lasts for until 70 years after the death of the last person who wrote it. Okay, so Lennon and McCartney's estate, well, Lennon's estate and McCartney's estate, eventually when he dies, the copyright will go to 70 years after McCartney dies, which is a very, very long time for people to keep earning money. The other half of a copyright is the Beatles' recording of that copyright, when they actually made that record, which I think was 65 or something. Copyright in recordings is for 50 years after the end of the year that it was recorded. So that copyright will run out at the end of 2015, which is not long to go. So there's quite a big imbalance, all right? So the example I always, again, like to use, if you get twins and they're in a band and one of them writes the song and one of them sings it, the one who writes the song, copyright will last for maybe 150 years, whereas the one who records the song, their copyright will only last for 50 years. So there's two copyrights in a song, in a recording, part one the song, two the recording of it.
That was quite a brilliant explanation. I was worried outside, but we don't book rubbish, do we here? We don't. He's quality. So.
Can I go now?
No, there's plenty more, John. You've impressed people now. Hang around. So, Alison, I want to move on from that, and I just want to talk about the application of that. And obviously, you know, with your specialist knowledge in record companies, how does that ownership of copyright work when you do a deal with a record company? Specifically, I'm interested in, we've lost the microphones for a second, specifically I'm interested in the assignment of copyright and licensing, and just for you to distinguish between those two things, please.
Sure. Well, again, things have become very complicated over the last 10 years, but if we go back to perhaps the 60s, it really was quite simple, because a record company you would normally assign the copyright. That's to say, you lose it. If you're the artist, that copyright transfers its own. You transfer the ownership of that copyright, not the publishing, because that might go somewhere else, but in the recording, to the record company for the life of copyright. So long after you might have left that company continues to own and enjoy the income, and will pay you a royalty off of any income they get for life of copyright. The other business model really is licensing, where you do what it says on the tin. You license. That's to say that you'll go to a company and you'll strike a deal whereby the company will enjoy the rights in that for a fixed period of time. So it might be 5 years, might be 3 years, might be 5 years with an option. There's all sorts of ways that you can do it. But one is simply transfer of ownership. The other one is a temporary transfer of ownership.